Normally I'm an actor, but I decided I wanted to direct a film because every actor wants to direct something sometime. I found a story I liked and was part of two stories actually. It was one part. It's a detective story set in contemporary Melbourne, and it has some sort of comic elements to it, but I was looking for a composer that was from Melbourne that I could find simpatico and whose work intrigued me, and I got the producers to get me half a dozen composers and put their work onto CDs, and I got this one from Cezary. I'm not really conversant with film composers, so I was first of all intrigued by this Polish name. It's an unusual and rather long name and difficult to pronounce, and I was curious as to why he was in Melbourne, and I was curious to listen to his music. I put on this disc, and there was music from perhaps 9 or 10 films on this, and all the music was extremely interesting and accessible, but there was an extraordinary variety involved in this music. He went from sort of strange kind of rock and roll through to very sort of classical music, and so that in itself was intriguing. I decided I wanted to meet him, and I went out to see him at his house, and that was kind of intriguing as well, because he was this rather erudite, cosmopolitan Polish guy living in suburban Melbourne, a kind of strange suburb too. It seems to be an enclave of Orthodox Jewish people, so there were a lot of people in long coats and little hats on, and there was Cezary in this very interesting house with beautiful art and on the walls, and he was very charming, and I warmed to him immediately. He took me out to his studio out the back, and a kind of strange cave where all this peculiar and wonderful music came out of it. And I thought, this is the guy, and I went the wrong way initially. I said, you know, when we've made the film, when we've got it on film, I want you to look at it, but I want you to think about what I'm thinking about, which is, I think it should be a kind of smoky, jazzy, kind of, you know, gumshoey, film noir-y kind of film score. And so he sent me out of the blue a few weeks later the sort of that kind of thing that he'd knocked up in his funny little cave, and it was very beautiful, but I'd realized at that point it wasn't what I wanted at all. And in fact, of course, I didn't know what I want, and I shot the film, we shot the film, and I was puzzled as to what kind of score it should have. So I went through my iPod and I just bunged a whole lot of things on there. And the curious thing about film is that you can put music, I know this because I used to direct documentaries, you can put music onto film, and it always works. Well, 9 times out of 10 it works. It makes it completely different, but it kind of fits. And I got attached to these kind of tracks that I'd put on because they seemed to be in the spirit of what I'd done unconsciously or consciously. So then I showed the film to Cezary and I said, I'm very sorry, Cezary. I was wrong, we don't want a film noir score at all. Let me show you what I've put on. He said, damn you, you're right. It does work. So I said, well, of course we can't use any of this because it's all copyright and it's expensive, and anyway, I want you to do it. So he went away and he came back with his own take on that sort of whatever milieu I'd put in there, and I had tango, and I had some kind of dance music, and who else? You know, I had basement jacks and all kinds of contemporary things in there. Cezary went away, dumped all that, and did his own take, and almost invariably his stuff was better than the stuff that I'd picked. So I was very happy with that. I was particularly intrigued. There was one track he couldn't get right, and that was I had basement jacks over the sort of sexy girl in the film. She crosses the bridge, and our hero looks back, and he likes the look of her bottom. You know, it's an everyday love story, and I said, "No, it's not right what you're doing, Cezary." So he went away and came back with this thing which was so beautiful. And I said, "How do you know to do this? This is amazing." He said, "Well, you know, I used to play in a blues band." I said, "No, you didn't play it." He said, "Yeah, I was in the Alexis Corner. I played piano for Alexis Corner." I said, "Alexis Corner, that's too cool. That's unbelievable. It's impossible." He said, "Yeah, I played with Alexis Corner." So he had absolute street cred from me from that point. It worked both ways, because I was one of the few people maybe that he talked to who knew who Alexis Corner was. So I think we came away from the experience not only liking each other, but with I have enormous respect for him professionally. There was really only one track that Cezary had difficulty with, and he's so dexterous, he can work in any medium as far as music goes. You know, his tango thing that he did for me was hilarious, particularly when post-sex, the sort of detumescent thing where the music kind of runs down, you know. But in this particular one, you know, the sort of sexy girl in the film is crossing the bridge. Our hero spots her, and I wanted something that's extremely upbeat. I had a track from Basement Jacks called "Do Your Thing," and it's very lively. It's lust at first sight, and our hero is life is good. And Cezary did 2 or 3. Kind of dummy tracks for it, and I wasn't really happy with any of them, and so we had this was the only track that was difficult. So we had a long discussion, and then I discovered that he said, "I know what you want. You want something that's rooted in blues and kind of dance." And I said, "You're right. That's absolutely what it should be." And that's when I discovered that Cezary had played for Alexis Corner in the Alexis Corner Blues Band. Now, there's my already high respect for Cezary went up to here, because, of course, I'm a child of the 60s, and I remember the Alexis Corner Blues Band extremely well. And again, it just seemed to be so unlikely. What was this Polish guy doing in London at the height of the blues, you know, wave? He's full of surprises.
And would you be able to pronounce his name? I'm sorry, it's just because I noticed his name is very, very hard to pronounce.
Look, I've never been able to pronounce his name properly. So Cezary is all he is to me, and I'm sure I'm not saying that right, and I've never been brave enough to attempt his second name.
Because it's in Australia, we know this very popular word Scooby, and he explained to me that he always is asking his friends, say Skubiszewski, and then if you put those two things together, it's his name, Skubiszewski. Yeah.
I'll never get it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the film itself?
Well, the film itself is a kind of, it's how to describe it. The film itself is a very Melbourne film. There's a sort of sardonic humour here that is peculiar to Melbourne, I think. Melbourne is where all comedians in Australia come from. I think because it's a slightly glum city, you know, glum places produce the best comedians, like Belgium. Canada, all the best comedians in America come from Canada. A lot of them won't admit it, but they're really Canadians. And in Australia, all the humour comes from Melbourne, you know. Sydney looks beautiful. Melbourne doesn't, so they have humour instead. So it's part of that sort of tradition of Melbourne humour. It's kind of sardonic as well as having a kind of innocence. The hero is a sort of jaded guy who's also extremely innocent and naive. He's a private investigator who isn't a private investigator. He actually works for a government minister, and he has a way of getting himself involved in murders and so on. So he's a detective by default. And it's supposed to be funny, and it's supposed to be also a thriller. And I think it works, but I love it, you know.
Look, maybe you're not aware, but in Poland we have once a year film festival, Australian Film Session. Actually now in Wrocław there is a festival that the honorary guest is Australia. Maybe next year, and I know the people, maybe next year your film can be shown at this festival.
Well, that would be nice. I mean, it's a very humble little film, and it would be daunting to show it in Poland, which has such a tradition of fine cinema.
You also very
great
good
directors.
sense of humor created through the history.
Well, yes, that's true. Yeah.
By the way, it's not your first experience with Polish people in filmmaking. You acted in a film directed by Krzysztof Zanussi, Z dalekiego kraju, which is in English From Far Country, about the Pope. That's you working with Cezarym Skubiszewskim was your second experience with Polish filmmakers.
Look, I'm always running into Polish filmmakers of one kind or another. But that was a very interesting film to make, because we got there about 2 or 3 months after Solidarity flew its flag, and so we were there through a very long and very cold Polish winter in Krakow, and we expected the Russians to turn up any day, but they didn't, thankfully. But it was a very interesting time to be in Poland, because things were in flux, and things were unstable. The place was full of optimism and anxiety, you know, an incredible time.
Have you been to Poland since?
No, I haven't.
It changed. You wouldn't recognize this place. You wouldn't know you're on the streets of London, maybe because the cars driving on the wrong side of the road, but the country changed extremely.
I'm sure, yeah.
Well, maybe with your film next year you'll be invited to Poland, and let's hope it will happen. One more question, if you have a few minutes time.
I've worked with one other Polish director, Zulawski. We made a film called Possession, which was just before From a Far Country. So he was another type of Polish director, and a very, very interesting extreme film.
Let's hope that we more films produced with you acting in films directed by Polish directors, or maybe you will be director and the Polish actors will be playing in your film. Who knows?
That would be wonderful.
But it would be nice to have you in Poland with one of your films as a guest of Polish film lovers. How come small countries like New Zealand and Australia make such a beautiful film and so present, so strongly present on the world, in the world cinema, and countries like Poland, Italy, they can't make it. You know, the Neill films are only, you know, mostly the art films. They never are as popular, like, for example, Australians. I mean, I don't want to use the example of Crocodile Dundee, because, you know, it's not this type of films. But Australia produced so many films, and they are known all over the world, very popular. And much bigger countries, they can't break the Hollywood domination.
Well, I suppose, well, it's very nice of you to say that, but I'm not sure if that's actually true. I mean, when you think of the great directors that have come out of Poland, like Polanski and Wywiad and Zanussi and so on, this is an extraordinary history of cinema. And I'm not sure if there's a comparable, well, there's Peter Weir, Gillian Armstrong, you know, there is a list here too. But I suppose it's kind of handy to be speaking English. You know, if one's talking about an international market, English kind of helps. But of course, it's a terrible mistake to want to make Hollywood films. And whenever they try to make Hollywood films here, it's catastrophic.
It's anything that the government itself can do to help, you know, the cinema to be visible on the world arena. Like, for example, Australia and New Zealand, they have a very special government regulations supporting film industry. In Poland, it's not the case anymore.
Really?
Maybe that's one of the reasons. I mean, of course, the language itself it's helpful. I mean, if you do a film in English, you can sell it all over the world.
That does help. Look, I think any country that's not America needs money put into the film industry. There's no question about that, and it's terribly important for any culture to be able to tell its own stories, but also a smart government knows that that the best calling card you can have is a vigorous and successful film industry. Australia, for instance, where we are now, started putting money into films in the 70s and 80s, and it made a huge difference. Australia was sort of, if people were aware of Australia at all internationally, prior to that it was the associations were with kangaroos and flies and bronze people on the beach. But with a kind of a renaissance of Australian film, Australia is conceived very differently now. I think, you know, that there is a tendency to take this place more seriously, perhaps, than it mightn't have been before.
With few words, the new film that you're working now, you're in Melbourne, you just arrived 1 hour ago, and I think on Monday you're starting, you know, the shooting of the new film starts here in Melbourne. What is this film about?
Well, I'm actually working on 2 films simultaneously at the moment. This current film is, there's a kind of a vogue in Australia at the moment for rather dark, somber, possibly slightly depressing films, which is a move away from all those sunny, you know, Abbott soundtracked movies from the 90s, you know. And this one is about a very, very disturbing murder that happened just down the road here about 5 or 6 years ago. And at the same time, I'm also up on the Gold Coast making a vampire film, Shades of Polanski, and that's rather dark too, but possibly in a rather different way.